Hello and welcome to the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. This is Yadi Caro. In each episode, we delve into a different skill with the help of an expert. After each episode, you can start applying what you have learned to advance in your career. Today's skill is creativity. We consider creativity as a territory that belongs to the people in music and art, but creativity is a skill we all have and can cultivate. My guest today helps people build what she calls creative competence. Natalie Nixon is a creativity strategist with a background in cultural anthropology, fashion, and service design, who now focuses on helping companies to innovate. She's also the author of the book, The Creativity Leap: Unleash Curiosity, Innovation, and Intuition at Work, where she discusses how to apply creativity tools and techniques with real world stories of innovative people and businesses. She also has a great TED Talk, and you can see it in the link in the show notes. Today, we talk about specific techniques for creativity, the importance of rigor, yes, discipline, and wonder. Let's listen. I saw your book on creativity, and I was fascinated by the whole concept and also your TED Talk as well. And it was very inspiring. And the book had a lot of great information and key advice. And I wanted to talk to you about that. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for looking at my work. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation.
I wanted to know first, in your TED Talk is something that you address, that you talk about growing up and being influenced by music. How much did music influence your work now?
Yes, so I grew up in a very musical home. My mother actually studied to be an opera singer when she was a teenager. And so part of the soundscape in our home was classical, European classical music. And then my father played the bass, the acoustic upright bass in the service. He served in the Air Force right after high school, actually. And he loved jazz. So I had that soundscape growing up. And so I've really brought that forward because of my parents' influence, but also because I studied dance since age 4. And dancers love music. For dancers, music is to dance. This is what I think. Music is to dancers what a color palette of paint is to a visual artist. It helps to fill out the movement and to tell the story. And so I became really curious and enriched by music just through my study of dance. And so now music really is, it still is this backdrop and the soundscape to my work and to my world. So it's very interesting. Before I knew of such a thing as emotional design and sensorial design, I realized that even since college days, I was really practicing that because I would have to clean up my space, burn incense, play certain type of music to help me either get energized or relaxed or, all those things, because music is energy, it's vibrations, and it truly affects us in all sorts of ways. So that's the way I still use music in my work and in my life now. It helps to set the tempo for my work.
And you talked about emotional design and sensorial design. Could you describe what that refers to?
Yeah, so there actually, I don't know if it still exists, but it's a Dutch gentleman who actually, I think it was called the Design and Emotion Society. And I tripped over it about 10 years ago in the midst of completing a PhD. And my PhD studies were in the field of design management and service design. And so I'm sorry, I don't know if they're still around, but that was my first just exploring the internet, where I realized that there's a group of designers who really are interested in designing experiences and designing services by tapping into people's emotions. And I thought that was wonderful because it really brings out the human dimension of how behind our choices, the human dimension behind how we make consumer decisions, how we interact with each other, how we show up to work. And so I remember I went to one Design and Emotion Society conference, and what I loved about it was how eclectic the attendees were. So presentations were being made by psychologists, physicists, anthropologists, commercial marketing executives, branding experts. It was just so fascinating. Improvisation artists. It was just fascinating how diverse the people were. So it's about designing in a way to be more tuned to people's emotions.
And like that, you mentioned that because in your book, you also talk about, because we usually tend to think that people, there's the creative people and there's this kind of the non-creative people. And you have identified that that's not really true, that it's we all have some creativity and it should be integrated. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's one of the biggest myths I think we have to bust, is that when we think that there are the creative types, because what that ends up doing, what we're really saying when we say that, is we're really talking about artists. And yes, artists are incredibly creative, and artists are excellent at grappling with the ambiguity of process. But in my opinion, to be human is to be hardwired to be creative. So to be an incredible engineer, teacher, plumber, consultant, entrepreneur, etc., you have to be super creative. And so it's very important, especially now when our society around the world is facing unprecedented levels of, well, as far as I know, unprecedented levels of complexity and ambiguity. It's really critical that we approach this level of complexity with creativity, and really stop conflating creativity only with art, with dance, with music, with theater, with music, etc.
What are some of the general misconceptions about trying to like add a sprinkle of innovation at work, or doing those initiatives?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is that it has become a bit of a fad without clarity on what innovation actually is. So in my consultancy practice, I get invited frequently to help my clients design cultures of innovation, which is fine, but it's important to level set what we mean. So I define innovation as an invention converted into value. And that value can be cultural value, financial value, social value, but that converting agent, how do we go from it being an invention to being an innovation at scale, is creativity. So creativity is that engine for innovation. Now, then the challenge becomes, well, how do we, how might I, in my work, help people to start incorporating creativity in a more corporate environment, especially when they've been thinking about art only when they think about creativity. So that's why one of the big reasons why I wrote the book, The Creativity Leap. And so I define creativity as toggling between wonder and rigor to solve problems. And in that way, I think we understand how that definitely shows up in the work of artists, and it shows up in the work of incredible entrepreneurs, from Elon Musk to Madam C.J. Walker to any startup leader today. There's an incredible amount of wonder, which is the curiosity, the audacity, asking bigger, what if, blue sky questions. It's also about pausing, and it's about awe. That's all wonder. And rigor is about discipline and focus and time on task. And both are absolutely essential. And so once I offer up that sort of level setting definition of creativity, it really democratizes creativity, and it helps a broader range of people to engage in exercising their creative competency.
And when you talk about rigor and wonder, does it mean that, for example, on our day to day, do we need to kind of adopt a particular practice every day, or to try to be creative? What do you refer when it comes to rigor, to create, to wonder?
Yeah, well, it's some, I think in the beginning, it has to be very intentional. For example, let's go back to artists. I encourage people to identify wonder mentors and rigor mentors, people who are living or dead, who you can look up to for the way they exercise wonder in their lives and rigor in their lives. So for me, one of my rigor mentors, I've never met her, but I admire her a lot, is the American modern dancer and choreographer Twyla Tharp. And so every day, she starts her day by stretching her body, and it's an extensive process that she goes through, and it's a ritual.
Mhm.
And so we do need to design in these rituals to remind us and help us with the rigor. I stretch my body every morning for 20 minutes during the work week. I don't do weekends. I'll take a class or something, but in the
Yeah.
mornings, Monday through Friday, I stretch my body. And it rituals are important because they help us to keep promises to ourselves. A wonder practice habit that I cultivate is I take daydream breaks. I push myself away from my desk. If it's cold outside, I stare out the window. A beautiful day like today, I go for a walk, I stare at the clouds. And it's
Mhm.
very important to be intentional about having these moments in our work and in our lives. And then we return to the task at hand much more invigorated. So whatever the work is that you do, whether it's waiting tables or leading a Fortune 500 team of executives, you have to add in those practices, and you have to design in original ways to help bring out the wonder and the rigor for your colleagues. And I also just want to mention that sometimes we conflate rigidity with rigor, and it's not the same thing. And
Okay.
I spend a lot of time thinking, well, how can I explain the difference between being rigid and being rigorous? In my view, when we are rigid, we do not adapt. We plow ahead, stick to our plan, even though all the signals and alarm bells are going off and telling us we need to shift. When we are rigorous, we show up with attention to detail and deep focus, but we are always being attuned to changes and shifts in the landscape. We are able to do what's called sense making. I've had a different conversation in another podcast interview, and I said it's almost like when well, I'm in Pennsylvania in the United States. I'm in Philadelphia, and
Mhm.
it's this, I think it's the state of the groundhog, but everyone wants to know, when's the groundhog going to come up out of the ground? How much more winter do we have? But if you imagine that little animal coming out of its burrow and like looking out, that's what we have to do in practicing rigor. You have to still be attuned to the external environment. And so leaders, whether they work in corporate environments, whether you are an entrepreneur, whether you educate, whatever the work is that you do, you have to practice ways to be attuned to wonder and rigor.
I wanted to know, in terms of why did you decide to focus on the topic of creativity?
I have a very loopy background in cultural anthropology and fashion. In my 16-year career as a professor, I the last 6 years, I was really focused on design thinking. And while there was a lot of incredible growth that I experienced professionally working in that space, I um, it's design thinking is a tool that I used. And once I went out on my own entrepreneurially, I really needed to identify, well, have you heard of the ikigai philosophy from the Japanese? It's Ikigai.
No, I
And
have
it
not.
basically,
Mhm.
if you imagine a Venn diagram of four circles, the ikigai philosophy basically is saying that when we can identify work that A, we love, B, we have skills that we understand the technique, C, we can earn a really great living with it, we can earn money with it, and D, we can help people, we can make an impact. I realized as I was needed to really hone in on what is it that I want to do outside of academia, once I decided I wanted to move on and build out my business, it really got down to creativity and strategy. Um, so that really has been the foundation of my work. It's what I'm good at. It's what I love. And so the book was really a culmination of many, many keynotes and talks that I would give. I really use my public speaking as a way to prototype ideas. And especially in the past 3 years or so, whenever I would give a talk, people who enjoyed the talk would come up to me and say, that was amazing. Where can I read more? And I realized I didn't have one place to direct them to. I blog and write for Inc. magazine, but that wasn't a fully holistic place. So a big reason for writing the book was to productize my intellectual capital and to have a holding place for this work about creativity. And really, it forced me to articulate the value and the relevance of creativity.
Wonderful. And your book gives very key advice, particularly for people who think they're not creative, of practical advice of how to integrate those things. Now, before we go, want to make sure that if for people who are, what's a key piece of advice of those who may not work in a field they consider creative that they should start like doing right now, just a key practice that they should do?
I give many tips, as you mentioned in the book, and I'd like to share a gift with your listeners. Remind me at the end of this. But one thing that all of us can definitely do, especially if you don't feel that you are creative or that you work in a creative environment, become a clumsy student of something. It doesn't matter what does matter is that you enjoy it, that you're curious about it, and it brings you joy. Because what will begin to happen when you are a clumsy student of whatever it is outside of your job, it will start to help you exercise what I call the 3 I's: inquiry, improvisation, and intuition. And that begins to ignite the brain, the neural synapses in our brains, that when you go back to the work at hand, you are not as afraid to improvise. You get better at asking bolder and different questions because you had to do it as a clumsy student. You get better at following your intuition. So right now, I'm a clumsy student of ballroom dance. I share different short videos on my Instagram account. So that's what I would recommend. Become a clumsy student of something.
That's great. And what's the best way for people to get in touch with you if they have any questions or just want to get more in depth with your consulting services as well?
Sure. Just visit figure8thinking.com. That's FIGURE, the number 8 thinking.com. As soon as you get to the homepage, you'll see an opportunity to download a free sample chapter of the Creativity Leap. And I'd love to give your listeners an opportunity to download the Wonder Rigor tip sheet. It has 6 tips and techniques. And so just go to bit.ly/WR tips, WRTIPS. And I'll send that to you as well. And you can share it in the notes.
Wonderful. That's what I will have it here on the notes of the show. Thank you so much for your time. And this was great. One more thing I need to ask you, because you talk a lot about the music in the book. Who's your favorite musician, or what's any particular music or musician that you may recommend?
I love music. So it's like a kid in a candy store. But I mean, first person I thought of is Sade. I actually shared that as an example in another interview I did recently. I love Sade because of she really broke ground and created an entirely new genre of music in the 1980s, because she was combining jazz, R&B, and pop. She is just an exquisite woman. She is an incredible artist and singer, and she reinvents about every decade. She reemerges. And also, on a personal note, she made me proud to have a high forehead. So I became less shy to wear my hair pulled back because of Sade. So, but I love bossa nova. I love jazz. I love hip hop. I love classic R&B. I love classical music. I love music.
Yeah, difficult to pick, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Yadi.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Hardcore Soft Skills Podcast. I have more resources for you from today's episode. Just go to the website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com, and subscribe to receive the weekly lessons. If you like what you've heard, give us a 5-star review via the website or via Apple Podcasts and share with others as well. Thank you, and until the next episode.